you everybody for joining us this morning for our 6th community gathering of Reading Frederick Douglass. My name is Nikki Lefebvre and I'm the Executive Director of the Natick Historical Society. We were founded in 1870 and today we remain an independent nonprofit. We receive no town funds and we thrive on the generosity and energy of this community and of all of you. So thank you very much. I am delighted to be co-hosting this year's reading with Natick is United and the Natick Center Cultural District. It's been just fabulous working together to join this reading with the community's Juneteenth celebration. I want to thank Mass Humanities, which receives funding through the Mass Cultural Council. They provide the material support for this event, but equally important, they have inspired readings of Frederick Douglass's powerful 1852 speech all over the Commonwealth, and now even beyond the Commonwealth. It's an extraordinary program, and I'm so grateful that Natick gets to be a part of it. So thank you, Mass Humanities.
Please slow down.
Okay. A big thanks too to Randy Brewer and Natick Pegasus for joining us every year to make the reading accessible to a broader audience online and on television. And my gratitude, as always, to my intrepid Natick Historical Society volunteers, Fran Weiss, Terry Evans, and Mia Kafetz. Thank you. I also want to thank our ASL interpreters here today, making this program even more accessible than it has been in years past. And a note to readers to pace ourselves because this is a job, man. Round of applause for our ASL interpreters. Fantastic. When this reading is finished, I will recognize every reader by name. But for now, I would like to give our readers a big, hearty round of applause. Yes, a community reading like this one could not happen if community members like each of you did not come forward to participate and make it happen. So thank you. And finally, I am honored, as always, to have Dr. Brenna Greer with us this morning and to give us some to give us some historical context for understanding and reflecting on this speech. And it's a pleasure to introduce her. So Brenna Greer is an historian of race, gender, and culture in the 20th century United States, who explores historical connections between capitalism, social movements, and visual culture. Her first book, Represented, The Black Image Makers Who Reimagined African American Citizenship, examines the historical circumstances that made the media representation of Black citizenship good business in the post-World War II era. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Nation, Daily Mail, Enterprise and Society, and Columbia Journalism Review. As an associate professor in the Department of History at Wellesley College, Greer teaches courses on World War II, the Cold War, the Black freedom struggle, consumerism, and capitalism, as well as visual culture. I'm also proud to tell you that she is a board member of the Natick Historical Society. Yeah. So please join me in giving Brenna a warm welcome. Thank you, Brenna.
Okay. I want to thank you all for being here. I realize it's kind of hot, so I will try not to talk for a long time, but I want to echo the appreciation that Nikki expressed to those behind this event, and of course to the readers who have volunteered to revitalize Frederick Douglass's most famous speech, "What to the American Slave is the 4th of July." And because she would never do it, I want to spotlight Nikki, who, as director of the Natick Historical Society, has seen to it that this event has taken place annually since June 2020, with the support of Mass Humanities through its Reading Frederick Douglass program, or Reading Frederick Douglass Together program. And this support is all the more appreciated given that Mass Humanities has had its challenges this past spring with all of its funding that it receives from the National Endowment of Humanities, the NEH, being cut. A loss of $1.3 million, or 35% of its annual revenue, that might have funded more events like this. This being true, and I must stress that this is coming from me and me alone, one might consider making a donation to Mass Humanities or organizations it has supported, such as the Natick Historical Society, as a way of honoring Juneteenth. Finally, I also want to thank Natick is United and the Natick Center Cultural District for bringing this Frederick Douglass reading into the broader celebration it has organized in recognition of Juneteenth, which celebrates that day in 1865 when federal troops finally arrived in Texas, the most western slave state, and enforced the emancipation of that state's 250,000 enslaved blacks. 2 months after the Civil War ended and 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. My appreciation here is not pro forma. It means something that this event is happening because just this morning I read a CNN report detailing the scaling back of Juneteenth commemorations, which I can testify to. In 2021, the year Juneteenth became a national holiday and the United States was said to be experiencing a racial reckoning following George Floyd's murder in 2020, I was invited to do so many paid Juneteenth talks that we could afford to replace all of the original plumbing in our 140-year-old home. And it has to be said that prior to 2021, no one had ever asked me to speak about or teach on Juneteenth in the 20 years I'd been teaching, researching, and presenting on U.S. and African American history at that point. This year, I can tell you there won't be any major home improvements, but the bigger point is if Juneteenth were a canary in a coal mine, there'd be reason for concern right now. Because this year, organizations as well as cities across multiple states, including Illinois, Indiana, New Jersey, South Carolina, Oregon, Colorado, cities with bigger budgets, and it has to be said, bigger Black populations than Natick, are scaling back or worse yet, canceling their Juneteenth-related activities. And that suggests that organizations and communities are facing unexpected or insurmountable hurdles and or repression when it comes to observing Juneteenth. And indeed, reasons cited for these cancellations include political and municipal opposition, lack of funding, obstacles to obtaining permit, and most troubling, concerns about safety. So again, it means something that Natick chooses to consistently honor Juneteenth, and I thank you. As some of you may know, I have provided opening remarks for this reading event, or for this Frederick Douglass reading event since 2020, which is an honor. Each year, Nikki approaches me in January or February to ask if I am willing and available to do so, which gives me months to think about what I might say here, and plenty of time to actually compose what I might say. And yet, I had to set my alarm for 3 a.m. this morning because I still didn't know what I wanted to say, and more to the point, I didn't know what I should or could say, which is because I have so much I want to say. But I recognize that this is not a political rally, nor my classroom, or my kitchen table. However, we are in a moment in which we need to decide who we want to be, a moment in which we are deciding who we will be for the unforeseeable future, which was precisely the message that Frederick Douglass intended to deliver with this speech that you are about to hear. As was true of his moment, ours will not write itself. We have been taught to believe, and we want to believe, that, as articulated by Martin Luther King Jr., the arc of history bends towards justice. As a historian, I can tell you that the historical record does not bear this out. Moreover, what everyone seems to forget is that justice is a construct, one that allows for oppression, suppression, and regression. Because let's be clear, the downward trend in Juneteenth commemorations isn't about apathy, nor is it merely cultural. It has been codified. through executive decisions to, quote, terminate every diversity, equity, and inclusion program across the entire federal government, to prohibit federal agencies from recognizing Black History Month and Juneteenth, to eliminate funding to agencies such as Mass Humanities, and to ban DEI initiatives and teaching of systemic racism in public schools K through 12. This moment requires that we ask ourselves what it means to be free, and not in the abstract. As a history teacher who teaches courses in US and African American history, it is routinely the case that I have occasion to ask my students, what is freedom? And it is almost always the case that I am met with silence, which both stuns and startles me. Failing to think about or grasp the meaning of freedom means that one takes it too lightly, assumes it, and or, most worrisomely, won't recognize, accept, resist, or know how to resist the curtailment of their freedom or that of others. As a federal holiday, Juneteenth, National Independence Day, celebrates the emancipation of enslaved Blacks. It is a day for celebrating freedom. However, as I always tell my students, it's important to understand that to be emancipated and to be free are not the same thing. Which is why I view Juneteenth as a day for not only celebrating, but also taking stock of freedom. But this requires first understanding freedom as it is officially defined, such that you can identify unlawful infringements on yours and others' freedom. That said, it is no less important to determine how you define freedom, and moreover, to determine at what point, according to your own metric, you must act on behalf of your freedom and others. In other words, what's your line? This cannot be unknowable, because choosing not to know, not to decide, allows for not acting. And when determining that line, we mustn't lie to ourselves. If there's only so much you can or will do to protect your rights and freedom or that of others, you need to know it, you need to know why, and you need to own it. As of late, I find myself on almost a daily basis auditing my readiness and willingness to be kept out of a classroom, or, the worst, to be separated from my daughter, in a fight for rights mandated by law, if not humaneness, that are essential to freedom, especially hers. Again, not answering these questions for ourselves, not drawing a line, allows for stasis. Perhaps incensed stasis, but stasis nonetheless. We live in a society now in which comfort so often wins out over being courageous. And it's always harder, even nonsensical, to choose courage when it seems that cowardice consistently wins the day. But here's the thing. The extent of one's freedom is reflected in the amount of courage it requires to experience it. Put another way, the more courage it takes to experience freedom, the less free one is, the less free we are. And I'd ask you to consider this. In 1852, slavery was alive and well in the United States, and the Fugitive Slave Act had just been passed in 1850, which, through the threat of fines and imprisonment, harnessed all Americans to the job of delivering enslaved Blacks who made it to freedom back into the hands of slaveholders. It's in this context that Frederick Douglass, a Black man, a formerly enslaved Black man, took the stage, as it were, in Corinthian Hall, a grand public meeting house in the city center of Rochester, New York. And before the white audience that packed that space, he delivered this speech that you will hear, in which he called out the hypocrisy while laying responsibility for slavery and the failures of American democracy that slavery represented squarely at their feet. So if he can do that, I can stand here and tell you, I'm obliged to tell you, especially as a historian, that at present, it is a fact that the laws and structures that define and protect the rights and freedoms of all people within this nation's jurisdiction, including marginalized groups, the undocumented, visitors, dissenters, and even criminals, are being disregarded, denigrated, and violated. For some, this may be just, or at least justified, but it is in fact in opposition to democracy, to say nothing of freedom, and for that matter, humanity. Thank you. So let me start this 1852 speech again, Frederick Douglass's most famous speech, What to the American Slave is the 4th of July. Yeah.
Are you starting off reading it?
Yes.
Okay, then we need to switch.
No. We got this. It's a smooth operation. Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before an assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government. England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed, in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children, such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measure of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers, feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government. Your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn, yet they persevered. Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers become restrictive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victim of grievous wrongs, wholly incapable, wholly incorrigible in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy of oppression. With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful, but amid all their terror, affrighted, vocifications against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it, resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So, indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in this instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes. For the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciate the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you.
Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm. The cause, which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown, has never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and as are familiar to you as household words. The form, the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave you, therefore, the great deeds of your father to others. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and done their work, and have done much of it well. You live, and you must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share of the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence expended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar, and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, for both your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer would be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light, and my burden be easy and delightful. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world.
My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never look blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to the false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse, I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not a heart a slaveholder should not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear one of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain and there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would have me argue on what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to provide that the slave is a man? The slaveholders punish themselves, acknowledge it in the enactment laws of their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which if committed by a black man, would subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of those crimes would subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl, shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
Is it not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation, as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutics, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, and that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There's blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would, today, pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boosted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of triumphs, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnities, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is no nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and dispositions of the old world. Search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, as you will say with me that for revelating barbarities and shameless hypocrisies, America's regains without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men was never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in 1/2 of this Confederacy. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy and as execrable traffic. To attest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much of this execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to the suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton fields and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves warily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See too that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank, the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on. Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See the men examine like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of this United States.
I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number has been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chain gangs that passed our door. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is, today, in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of the men. My soul sickens at the sight.
But a still more inhumane, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States. The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner, the American Christianity. Where these go may also go the miraculous slave hunter. Where these are men is not sacred. He is the bird for the sportsman's gun. By the most foul and fanderish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children, dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights of this republic, the rights of God included.
For black men, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witness for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant killing, kill-hating, king-hating, people-loving, democratic Christian America, the seat of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open, implacable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice and shameless disregard for the forms of administrative law and cunning arrangements to entrap the defenseless and diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria and pride yourself on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyranny of Virginia and Carolina.
You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement, your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation. A system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty. You shed tears over Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against oppressor. But in regards to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of the liberty of France or for Ireland, but as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that, of one blood, God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate, and glory in your hatred, all men whose skins are not colored like your own. You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a word to a mocking earth. It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away, and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
But it is answered in reply to all this that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is a part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least so I believe, and others have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, all God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe.
Thank you so much. I do have a few announcements, but before I would do that, I'd like to thank every reader by name. Brenna Greer, Karen Wireman, and Peter Bishop, Maribel Lambrecht, Anna Claire Catalfano, Marina Yiannopoulos, Scott Casper, Cindy Worthington Berry, Sarah Beth Gupta, Abigail Brewer, Doug Hanna, Miriam Hernandez Jennings, Tanav Pakhtar, Jackie Morton, Robert Awkward, Swati Dav, Kirsten Curtis, Brinley Victors, Sarah Hanna, Susan Simone Kang, Bruno Giles, Lolo Lambrecht, Richard Sidney, Susan Masad, Paul Carew, Donna McKenzie, Marianne Burkowski, Robin Melendez, Lynn Fantelli, Cynthia McReynolds, Eugene Rothman, and Marley Wiest. A round of applause for each of you. Thank you.